Hello, everybody. My name is Garrett Ziegler. I'm a community food systems educator with Michigan State University Extension here in the Grand Rapids area. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about kind of the history of the food system, kind of how we've gotten to where we are now, and what kind of things we're doing to kind of maybe buck that trend and why it's important to kind of reimagine and rethink about how we get our food and where our food comes from. So to really begin that kind of conversation, I think it's important to have a better understanding of what is a food system. So really a food system is essentially all of the pieces between food production and food consumption. So like any system, all of these pieces are interconnected and interdependent. So it's hard to think about food production without thinking about the processing and the distribution and the actual consumption of that food, to get back to how we're actually producing it and where it's going once it's produced. And also an important part of the food system is food waste and what is happening with our food waste once we're done with it, and how we can use that food waste to connect back to the production side through things like composting and taking the food waste and using it as an input for producing more food. So that's really basically what a food system is. It's kind of all of those pieces in between and how they interact. So thinking about that in terms of our current food system, we've really, as humans, as a population across the world, we've taken that food system, which is based on all the different components, and really made those components as far apart from each other as possible. So the food system looks really different now than it did probably 50, 60 years ago. So with the explosion of population that followed World War II, through the baby boomers, our food system went through something that people have called the Green Revolution. But really, it was just kind of industrialized to be able to meet that growing demand and that growing population. So while there was a time many years ago, and probably our grandparents will remember this, or great-grandparents, depending on how old you are, there was a time when everyone knew their local farmer, who grew their produce, raised their meat, and produced their eggs and dairy products. There were milkmen that delivered milk to your house every day, and you knew the dairy that was producing that milk, and the milkman that was bringing it to you. And now we're just really focused on being able to go to a grocery store and find all the food that we want to be able to get right from the grocery store or from the convenience store, wherever you have access to that food, and not really thinking about who produced it or how it got there. So it's really those kind of increasing separation between all of those components of a food system that have really kind of changed our food system over the last 50 or 60 years. And what they really talk about that in certain terms of food systems and academia is that we've kind of gone from a food system where everybody, like I said, the milkman who's producing the milk, to really more of a global anonymous food system. So the farm that's actually producing the food that you're eating, you don't know who the farmer is or where that farm exactly is. The company that's probably taking that in and processing that lightly or washing it, the company that's then distributing that food and bringing it to your grocery store, none of those pieces within that food system are aware of kind of each other or what each other is doing. And that's a really different way from how things used to be, and a really different system from how we're trying to change the food system into a more local and community-based food system. So those changes in the food system, kind of the growth of this industrialized on people, on how we look at the lifestyle efficient food system, global food system, have had a lot of impact on styles, specifically around diet and health. There's been such an explosion of obesity, and especially within childhood and adult obesity over the past 30 to 40 years. And while there's a lot of different factors that go into that, it's not unreasonable to say that our food system has played a vital role in that growth of obesity, diabetes, and other diet-related or kind of lifestyle-related health problems. So just a few statistics looking at obesity. Those rates have tripled between 1960 and 2010 to 35% of all adults in the U.S. And then even more kind of drastically within children, obesity has more than doubled in children and quadrupled in adolescents in just the past 30 years. So like I said, not all of that is directly related to the food system. There's a lot of other factors involved with kind of how our society has shifted, and we've become much more sedentary in our work and in our daily lifestyles. But a large part of that is due to the diets that we eat and our kind of dependency on higher calorie, less nutritious food products. So I guess the next question is kind of, just kind of answered it with that last point is, are these changes in our food system, are they really beneficial for society and for humanity. In some ways, they definitely are. We're facing massive population growth. Still since the baby boomers, we've still been still growing across the world in population. In the year 2050, they're saying that we're going to be having to feed 9 billion people worldwide. So it's going to take a ton of food production to be able to feed all those people. But we're looking at different ways, and the idea of industrialized, highly efficient, getting as much food per acre grown as you can seems like that would be a really good thing to do to be able to feed all of those 9 billion people. And it definitely is. It's definitely going to be a necessary component of how we're feeding ourselves, 30, 40 years from now. But it's also had a lot of other impacts that we haven't really been able to see until now. And you think about this industrial efficient food system is really based off of providing inexpensive food for a large number of people. And while that's really great that you can go to the grocery store and buy a ton of food for $100, it's not really taking into account the other factors and the other costs or externalities that are associated with the production of that really inexpensive food. So it would be useful to talk about, when we talk about food systems now, and in the work that I do with community and local food systems, we're really trying to get back to the idea of basing our food system locally and within our communities, and basing it around this idea of what's called good food. So good food is kind of the opposite of industrial, efficient food production. So good food really looks at 4 key components, and these were created by what's something called the Michigan Good Food Charter. So across the state in 2010, a number of people working on local food systems, sustainable and environmentally friendly food production, all got together in Lansing and said, we need to kind of create a vision for the state of Michigan's good food policy kind of moving forward for the next 10 years. So they developed a set of parameters around what is good food. And those 4 parameters are good food is green. And that doesn't necessarily just mean green in color. We're kind of using that term there as a way to describe the environmental impact that the production of that food has. So it's really looking at sustainable food production, organic food production, minimal use of pesticides, and basically just lowering the impact that food production has on the environment. And that's kind of the antithesis that we've seen from some of the larger industrial scale agriculture production, which really doesn't take into account the impact that they have on the environment as they're trying to produce their food. Another thing that good food is it is affordable. And that basically is saying it's not that good food is cheap, it's just saying that good food is accessible to all. So when you're thinking about a large impact of the work that food pantries do and food assistance folks is being able to provide food to people that are hungry or that don't have access to food. And that's a really, really important part of providing good food and labeling something as being good food is that everybody has a chance to benefit from that food and to be nourished by that food. And the third point is good food is healthy. So we've talked a lot about the growth of industrial, efficient food production, and that's kind of really been focused on processed food, the use of and growth of corn, and the use of corn products like high fructose corn syrup and other products in our processed foods. And while there's a lot of calories in those foods, there's not a lot of nutrition in those foods. So people are eating a lot of cheap, high-calorie food products which don't actually provide them the nutrition that they need for their bodies to thrive. So when we think about good food in the terms of the Michigan Good Food Charter, we're really focusing on food that is healthy, food that is nutritious, and food that will allow people to thrive and get the needed nutrition that they need to live happy and healthy lives. The last point about good food is that it is fair. And that really means that kind of along the supply chain of how that food was grown, processed, distributed, and then consumed is that nobody along that supply chain was taken advantage of. Workers were paid fair wages. So something we've seen a lot with the industrial food system that we're kind of working within now on a global scale is that workers in a lot of those food production places are not being taken care of. They're not being paid fair wages. They're being taken advantage of. And it creates this really unfortunate situation where not only is the food that we're producing not healthy and not nourishing the end users, but it's also having a detrimental impact on the people that are producing it. So that's a really, really important part of what makes up good food. So, all right. So that is really what makes up the good food, the 4 good food principles. Now, I think it's important as charitable food organizations to look at how you can apply those good food principles to the work that you do. So we've talked a lot about this industrial, efficiency-based food system, and really what are we trying to do to kind of counteract that and get back to a system that's based on community and local and knowing your producer. And really it comes down to the fact that we're trying to educate consumers and the people that buy food, that they're the ones that can really control what the food system looks like. By using their dollars and their ability to choose where they're purchasing food or where they're supplying food from. So as a charitable food organization, you may be looking at your role as just providing food to people who are hungry. But I think it's really important to kind of reframe that and think about it as providing not only just food, but good food, and using those 4 principles of what good food is as you're looking at where you're getting food from, as you're looking at getting involved with innovative local food system projects such as this Farm to Pantry project. So there's really a lot of things that as an organization working in charitable food procurement and provisions is that there's a lot of things that you can do to work to kind of help change the food system to something that not only is able to provide food for people, but also able to protect our environment and really, make sure that there's no negative social impacts from the production of that food, consumption of that food. In conclusion, I think it's really important that we kind of understand how our food system has changed over the past 50 to 60 years, kind of how we've gotten to where we're at, what impacts that change has had, and then how we can kind of reimagine that food system and think about the benefits of basing our food system not on efficiency, not on large scale, but on quality, on transparency, and on supporting a locally based food supply chain. So as you go into your work as charitable food organizations, just keep in mind where the food that you're serving is coming from, and that it's important not only to provide food in general, but it's really important to provide that food that is fair, is healthy, is affordable, and is green.